morning, everybody. My name is Shauna Stefanchik, and I'm the president and founder of Step Up. And today I wanted to do a quick overview of what is a guaranteed and viable curriculum. This is a little bit about the company of Step Up, and you can see the number one bullet is teacher recruitment and retention. And I'm going to talk about this quickly because I think that today we're going to talk about guaranteed viable curriculum. If we want to be clever, GVC, because we have to add another acronym into education. But I call this a great curriculum myth. So as I go through this, there might be some people that are like, I never really thought about that being guaranteed and viable curriculum. But I truly do believe it helps with this first bullet of teacher recruitment and retention if we get this part right and we clear up the misconception that we have had in our field. So today I'll go quickly through what is a guaranteed and viable curriculum, where do our priority standards fit in, how do I make one, and then how do I fit proficiency scales? I'm going to go back here. You see these two bullets of competency-based and personalized learning. Missouri's, if you're familiar with the Student Success Ready Network, that is a group that is studying a new way that we could be doing education in Missouri. And my crystal ball tells me our state is going to eventually go that way. And they're looking at the model of personalized competency-based learning. They're pulling both of those in. So the competency is your durable skills, your real world competencies that kids need to have in the workplace. So when you hear portrait of a graduate, I'm throwing out all these terms and trying to make connections, but portraits of a graduate are talking about the competencies, that entrepreneurial things and durable workforce skills that kids would need, the competencies. And the personalized part is how do we personalize academic and competencies for each kid? So all of this is connected to the system of a guaranteed and viable curriculum and proficiency scales, but I want to kind of make that connection. That's all the things that we're trying to do with our approach here. And I'm going to just tell you in this video what I think should happen. I can tell you how Step Up can make that faster, but just really want to provide the content and information behind it. So what is a guaranteed and viable curriculum? Most of the time, if we ask teachers, what is your curriculum? Val, I'll call you out. What do teachers mostly say when we say, what is your curriculum?
Typically, and I think I had this misconception when I was getting started as well, typically people think that the textbook or the resource that they have is the curriculum.
Right. And that's what I get all the time. And that's what I call the big curriculum misconception. I had it as well. When we come from a university, college, and we're not quite ready, and I'm not anti-textbook or resources at all, but we tend to think those things are a curriculum. And really, this is Marzano's definition. I consider him the godfather of things curriculum, but he says the guarantee is that every student is provided the opportunity to learn a core curriculum that provides them with a probability of success in school. And here's the memo we don't tell everybody. Our state legislative votes on that, and that's the state standards. So again, nobody gave me this memo. I really think we should be saying, hi, teacher, welcome. Did you know that by law, you have to expose your kids to the state standards? I was an underprepared teacher. I didn't know about the standards. I clung to a textbook, and we'll talk about in a second why that has gotten us in trouble, even with proficiency. So the guarantee of college readiness for Missouri in any state are those standards that we have voted on. It's saying every school will determine educational equity and success because our state voted on we have to do these standards in each grade level. If you do that and cover them, kids should be ready for college. So that's the guarantee we give in Missouri. It's the standards. What's the viability? That we have a necessary plan of how to teach those standards. So when we say guaranteed and viable curriculum, what are your standards logically paced? Okay, so that's our interpretation of it. And we really want to help, again, teachers get away from, it's not your textbook or your resources. It is your standards. Now, it is not a textbook, okay, but we need these resources and textbooks to help us, right? Because they give us specific lessons and strategies to use. So what we need to do, and I'll show you in a second, is understand how those two work. And we're going to do that. So then another thing happened post-pandemic is we got these priority standards. So if the guarantee is that we do our standards, but now we have priority standards, what you need to understand about the priority standards are the state got a work group together post-pandemic to identify what are the standards in each grade level, because there's so many. How would you prioritize those as must-haves for teachers? Because it's hard to cover everything. Can't give as much attention to all of them. So in 2020, 20 and 21, work groups got together and decided those for the state. Then the state said, hey, and by the way, 80 to 90% of MAP and EOC assessments are going to start being over those priority standards. So that's important for us to realize when we're thinking about our standards paced, that they're not all created equal, that we want to really make sure that those priorities are the ones that are really mastered. So this is an example. I just took a screenshot of a typical, this kind of looked like the curriculum I had when I came into a district, where people have this one pager that have all the codes and here's the priority standard, and they might have some concepts. But this, I have found that this format when I was a teacher was not helpful to me, especially when you have the codes that are pretty ambiguous down at the bottom. And so the approach that we would suggest, and again, you don't have to use our materials to do it, but what we want to help do for teachers when you think about a guaranteed and viable curriculum is you still want to honor the resource you're teaching, but you want to help teachers see the connection between the standards and that resource. Because here's why we're not scoring well. Most resources do not cover all of the state standards. So if you're not looking at the standards and you blindly buy even the ones on the DESI recommended reading list, let's just say it, they are missing in some grade levels up to 20 standards in a grade level. So if you teach just that resource, which you're going to have trouble hitting all the lessons anyway, because it's made to teach over an entire year, it's made to skip around. But what will happen is you won't be covering all of the standards. So you have to organize and audit your curriculum to know in my resource what Missouri priority and supporting standards are taught in each unit. Because what might happen is you'll realize that there are lessons in your resource that you can skip sometimes. And I'm going to show you some examples of that. So here's an example of what we would suggest teachers to do when you make your guaranteed and viable curriculum, which could be a scope and sequence pacing guide that looks like the chart we have here. You're going to look at number one, we want to have the pacing on it, but then look in your resource, what Missouri priority and supporting standards are found in that, and list them. And you're going to go through this, and in our process, here's an example of doing that with Eureka Math. Reading is very complicated to do this with. Every other subject is a bit easier. So here's an example of doing that in Eureka Math. So you'll notice we even hyperlinked that resource and we want teachers to see that connection. We're trying to make this landing page. This is how you retain people. If they can come in and see, hi, welcome. Here are your standards paced. Here's the resource you use to teach it. And here's everything you need in one spot. That's what we believe and what we're trying to do. But if you look in module 2, Eureka says spend 25 days, but now we notice there's only really one Missouri priority standard. And it's over measuring length, liquid, volume, and weight. So if there are other lessons for 20 days over things not related to length, liquid, and volume, what this tells the teacher is those lessons aren't as important. There are lessons that you can gloss over. Now, we'd have to look further down. If they're supporting standards, we still want to cover them. But what this is telling this teacher is in this unit, what you really have to master is this standard, and your assessment needs to be over this standard. And if there are lessons that don't get to that, then that's giving you some wiggle room. You hear teachers say, I don't know what to give up. I've got so much to do. This process helps them. The resources they are using are planned where they could teach every day all year without a winter break, summer break. And so this process really helps them see, here's how you can intentionally go throughout this resource. Your resource will say it's aligned to Missouri, but it's also aligned for 20, 30 other states because they're a resource trying to accommodate lots of state standards. You have to organize and audit it to your state. So what we would see in module 2 after doing this process is teachers could clearly see, this is what I really need to focus on, and I probably don't need 25 days. Now let's look at module 6. It said you only need to spend 10 days, but we see there's no Missouri priority standards in it. But module 7 probably has 2 or 3. So this would tell us, you know what, I should flip those modules because if I don't get to collecting and displaying data, it's not as heavily prioritized. So I hope you see just in the organization of this, we want to help teachers see the connection between their standards and their resources. We want them to be able to audit their resource to see, for instance, this data one was really eye-opening. This is a kindergarten one, and they love doing charts and pictographs. And they're like, oh my gosh, I normally spend 4 to 5 weeks on that. It's not even a priority in kindergarten. That doesn't mean don't teach it. So you have to look at your vertical alignment. Money is also not on here as a priority. And by goodness, you better be teaching money. So you have to look at that vertical alignment too. But this is helping you audit your resource. And I don't need to spend 25 days on it though. And it helps you see where you maybe need to add in some other things. Resources are not infallible. You're not held to teaching your resource. You're held to teaching your standards. You use a resource to help you teach those standards. So helping teachers make that connection is very important for a guaranteed viable curriculum. So this is just example. I wanted to show you an overview of, this is how we format it. This is just to give you ideas if you wanted to do it differently. We always want to, you can see in these, in every unit, we want the teacher to clearly see what's my priority. Why it's in pink is we put it in student-friendly language. And then the yellow is the standard, and then it's the supporting. So a teacher can see at a glance when this is filled out, what are all the standards I'm supposed to teach over the course of the year. The ones that go in yellow and pink, those also I should be creating assessments over. It helps me know what has to be mastered and what has to be covered. And then at the top, I think is really great when you do for teachers is we just took all those high leverage DESE documents that teachers should know about, and we hyperlink them right there at the top. So a teacher comes to this and clearly has a plan. Now, if you're looking at personalized learning and you're considering proficiency scales, let's see, here's an example of ours. I'm going to kind of skip over that. Here's an example of our proficiency scales, because there's two things that can get us in trouble if we're not scoring proficient. One is this first process. Are we even teaching all the standards? So we need to organize and audit our resource to see, are we even covering everything we're supposed to? Because if you're not covering it, that'd be why you're not scoring well. Number two is now I have that, once you have a plan of how to cover it, you want to see if your resource is testing it and teaching it to the proficiency of how your kids will be tested on the state assessment. So here's, everybody on the call has probably heard a teacher say, ooh, I taught that, but I didn't word it like that, and so my kids didn't do well. So that's why I'm like, now I realize why I had this slide. So here's a common third grade skill, drawing conclusions and supporting with textual evidence. If I love doing this activity, if I have 6 teachers, I say, write a question that a proficient third grader should be able to answer to that standard. Your question rigor and content is going to be all over the place because the standards are so subjective. And so even if you Google teacher pay teacher or resources out there on drawing conclusions and textual evidence, what happens is teachers say, oh, it says conclusions and textual evidence. That's it. I'll use that. And we just assume that it's going to get us to the rigor and proficiency of the state test. But that's the problem. It's not. Sometimes what we consider a good question is really a level 2. So how do we remedy that? We have to, that's why I have these things. The state has item specifications, MOLE blocks, and map released items. This is where they tell us, hey, this standard's subjective. So we've created these documents to give you more clarity about what proficiency really means. So if you haven't used these documents, definitely do that. It's really helpful for teachers. Now, the problem is you normally have 45 minutes with them, and this is a lot of documents to try to help them digest. So that's where in our map books, we pulled them into our proficiency scales. And you can see on the right-hand side here, we have, okay, at the top, if this is your priority standard, here's how you would ask a level 4 question. Here's how you'd ask a level 3, and here's examples from the state. This is what brings teachers clarity, not just unwrapping standards, but seeing this is what the rigor of the state means. And we even chose ones that have unique question types because sometimes it's the question rigor that throw kids off. But what you need to do next with your resources, have teachers vet, look at your resource. Does the rigor content and question type rigor look like, sound like what the state has given them? what the state would say. And you don't have to use our guides. You could just look at that and use the item specs and have teachers see, does your resource ask it to the rigor of the state? And what you'll find is a lot of times our resources are asking at a level 2, our current assessments are asking at a level 2. So even if you're teaching the standard, if you're not teaching it to the rigor and assessing it at the rigor, that's why your students aren't achieving. Because sometimes let me give you a concrete example. I was working with a first grade teaching team, teaching text features. They'd used the same assessment for 5 years. We brought it in and we pulled up, they were using our tool. So I had them read the difference between level 3 questions and level 2 questions. And then I had them go back to their assessment and label, are your questions 2s or 3s? Their whole assessment was 2s. And they said, well, wait a second. According to the state information, this standard means it goes beyond just identifying text features. It wants them to use a text feature to find information. Their entire assessment had just been over the names of the text features. And that happens all the time because you see a keyword like text features and you think, oh, okay, we'll teach text features. But it's not just knowing the names, it's using those text features. So your teachers really do need to dig into these documents to get clarity. And I was showing them, now look, in 2nd grade, if you had kept it just the name of text features, they have to not only use text features to find information, then they have to use them to find evidence. You're bringing off that chain of complexity for grade levels to go. And so I used a non-tested grade level there for that example, but you can see how at tested grade levels, if you never get to the rigor, you're never even giving kids the opportunity to be proficient. And so this is why I was behind creating these, is because I realized teachers are working so hard, but they don't know the target. And the state's given things to see the proficiency target, but it's too hard. So that's why we put them into these books to try to combine all that information into a really easy spot for teachers so they could just glance, okay, here's the level 3, here's what my questions should look like, and here's what I should ask. I can vet my resource. If I don't have a resource, I can use this to create my own. Or if I'm Googling and finding teacher pay teacher, I can vet everything I have by these resources. Again, if you don't have our map books, then you're going to be vetting your things using these resources. So I'm going to get ready to wrap it up. For a guaranteed and viable curriculum, you need to have your standards paced. But it's smart to do it to your resource so you can organize those standards and audit as you go. Does our resource even cover everything? Because once you have that, you have a viable plan of how to teach the standards throughout the year. And then the next thing you need to consider is, now that we have this plan, how do I help teachers have clarity around what those standards really mean? And that's where proficiency scales come in. And so what our team does, if you meet something like this, you can hyperlink I'm going all over the place here. You can hyperlink your teacher scale or your student scales to the pink. Let me find this one right here. When you have a standard, you can hyperlink your student scales, because we need student proficiency scales as well. And you can hyperlink your teacher priority scales right into this guaranteed and viable curriculum. Because we believe that if you have that and can provide this clarity and great roadmap for people, that is a big barrier that can help with retention and retaining people, as you're organizing and providing that clarity and not making them run through the hoops every year of trying to find it. So if you are creating proficiency scales, we encourage you, make a pacing guide like this and paste it all in, make a nice landing page for your people. Here's how we do it quickly. This is a plug. If you're like, this seems very overwhelming, we already have these pacing guides created, and then we created a standards tab for teachers. So this saves a lot of time for them when you're copying and pasting, organizing and auditing. It's already right there and color coded for them. So they just have to copy and paste it over. On the left-hand side, what you don't see is there's also a checkbox. So when they use the standard, they're checking it. And at the end, they're easily seeing, oh my gosh, whatever I'm using missed 6 priorities, etc. So we can make those decisions. So if you watch this and it seems really overwhelming, no, we have a process that can help you with that to make it faster. We typically do a K through 12 building in 2 days using this process, because we want to get this part done quickly. because we really want to get to clarity of the standards and instruction. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. I will, for those of you watching, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out on info and email us if you have questions, or take a look on our website for more information. Thank you.